welcome to our second masterclass of the masterclass series that we're running here at the Social Mobility Commission. We're just going to wait, as always, I guess with etiquette nowadays, a few more minutes just to see if anybody else dials in to join us. But you are in the right place if you're looking for the masterclass on hiring by the Social Mobility Commission. So I'm glad that you've managed to negate the challenges of Zoom, which we were having yesterday, but it looks like there's a few more joining us, which is brilliant news. So let's just give it to about 2 more minutes, Lindsay, and then we can start. Those who are just dialing in at the moment, just to let you know that this is the masterclass on hiring run by the Social Mobility Commission. So we're just going to give it a couple more seconds and then we're going to start. So thank you for everybody for joining us. There may obviously be more of us joining along the way, because I think that's the case nowadays when we have so many meetings booked into our diary in the virtual world we're living in. So we'll obviously do our best just to negate any disruption, but thank you all for joining us. We've got a few of my commission colleagues on the line who will help drive this masterclass, and we've also developed the masterclass with partnership with ACCENTURE and Head Start, so we'll be hearing from their case study today. Lindsay, if you want to go on to the next slide. So I think, as often is the case with the etiquette of working on the virtual world, please remain on mute for the main presentation. We will then be going into breakout rooms, which obviously is where we want you to be as vocal and insightful as possible. So obviously, please take yourself off mute at that point, but for ourselves at the moment, please, if you could put yourself on mute, and for those for bandwidth, again, in the main presentation, just to stay off video, but obviously we'd welcome sharing those when we go into the round tables. If you can use the chat box, please place your name and company in the chat box so we can see who we've got on the call with us today. That would be brilliant. We're not going to take questions just as we're going through the main presentation because of the nature of how we've done the workshop with the round table. But if there are any pointers that come up as we go through the presentation, please feel free to add them into the chat box. And then if they're not covered in the round table, it's something that we can ask our guest speakers on, so we can send that in the output from today. And the webinar is being recorded. The roundtables won't be, but the webinar is being recorded because some of your peers, as often is the case, unfortunately weren't able to make it today. So there will be a recording of this, so you can obviously share that with peers after the event. So Lindsay, if you want to move on to the next one. So today, as I mentioned, just as people were dialing in, we're going to be talking about hiring and how you can use hiring to drive diversity within your talent pools. We've got Accenture today, so thank you, Accenture, for joining us. So we've got Joan and Helen from the recruitment team. We've got Tom, who is from the Head Start platform, which they use for recruitment. And we'll also have Lindsay, our own commissioner, on the faculty, talking about business case for change of recruitment. We'll be going into roundtables, as I mentioned, where our team of facilitators will skillfully take you through conversations around the selection, the recruitment and assessment, the use of technology, and building the business case, really so we can harvest ideas of the challenges that you're having in this space, really to try and drive a diverse workforce into the front end of your process. And then the output would then be some kind of review document that we can create from today's session. Lindsay, if you want to move on to the next one. Now, for those of you who've attended a number of our webinars, you'll be very familiar with our stance on social mobility. And again, this is just ensuring that we're all on the same page. So from our position, for us, social mobility is the link between a person's occupation or income and that of their parents. So from our side, it's basically about ensuring that regardless of your background, this does not determine your future. And that is the position from ourselves and what we'll be talking about. So if you click on to the next one, Lindsay, and for many of you, obviously, on the call today, you will be very versed with the benefits of having a diverse workforce. And we ourselves, from the research that we know, that 43% of businesses with more diverse workforce actually have higher profits. We also know that if you have inclusive teams, actually they make better business decisions 87% of the time and twice as fast, and actually deliver 60% better results. So I mean, that's a no-brainer, isn't it, as to why diversity is important in businesses. And again, I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it's just, I suppose, from our position to ensure that you know that there is statistical evidence out there, not just the fact that it helps with improved branding and it helps with the well-being and employee engagement. And it helps you think about driving talent from a pipeline, not just recruiting product market matches into your workforce. So moving on, Lindsay, in terms of what we're going to talk about in hiring. So for us, there's nothing more important from an employer's position than the quality of your staff. So it's who you hire, how you hire, and getting the best out of your people, really, to drive that competitive advantage. So what we're going to be talking to do today is about how you attract the best talent, no matter what their background at the onset. It's about breaking those recruitment models that you've used historically and adapting smart, progressive ways. It's about innovating your recruitment process. So it's mining for that hidden talent that you've not sought and found before. And actually, once they're in that process, supporting them through. So actually, you are limiting any barriers or blockers that they might stumble along the way. So Lindsay, if you just move on, we can talk a little bit more about the detail of what we mean by this. So this is a slide we used within our outreach masterclass. And for us, it's no different with regards to recruitment. So it's about considering the beginning. So all those old school hiring practices no longer fit for purpose. So if you're mining for that hidden talent, you need to walk in their shoes and you need to think about, okay, well, what is going to motivate my talent? How do I connect with them? Where do I find them? It's about understanding that community piece. So if you're looking at a diverse workforce, one, you want to obviously reflect the community your business is working in and the consumers of your products, but also how can you connect with this talent in your community? And what are you looking for in your organization? How are you looking for that competitive advantage to basically help promote and drive creative thinking through this diversity of talent? If you want to go on to the next slide, Lindsay, one thing we are very keen to do at the Social Mobility Commission is to bring real life stories. And we've just issued our first Instagram account where we're actually speaking to people to understand what it means to them from a social mobility perspective. And this is one of the individuals that we spoke to, Chris, who works in a call centre. And he's an individual who, when he was applying for roles with his African name, he never got an interview. And then he slightly tweaked his CV and put on a British sounding name and he got called to interviews. He's got 2 degrees. And yet actually the role that he's doing isn't reflective of the potential that he could give an organisation. And he really just doesn't feel empowered. He's got this massive ability and he wants to give back to society, but because of these barriers, it's not enabling him. So you doing work in social mobility when it comes to recruitment really can make a difference to people's lives. It's not just about statistics. And Lindsay, if you want to move on to the next one, it's now almost looking at that recruitment process that you currently have. So obviously it's not just about a CV. A CV is not the context of hiring, and a person's life circumstances actually shape their capabilities. So if someone has struggled from lots of disadvantage, actually the achievements that they have in life are even more admirable. So when you're thinking about that attraction stage, it's about understanding how you're going to attract that talent. And I know from the survey that we did that actually 83% of you are already using inclusive language. So that's brilliant. And also I realise that the current economy is probably going to affect the way you maybe go about recruitment because of the shift in talent that's on the marketplace. But please still think about that inclusive language and how you can go and attract individuals from a lower socioeconomic background. And by that, it's thinking about the roles that you do in your recruitment process. So have you got all types of levels in your organisation? Now, again, 67% of you said that you advertised all jobs, which is brilliant to hear. And it's ensuring that you feed that pipeline from apprenticeships, paid internships, graduates, through obviously more to lateral hires in that role process. Then when we're looking at recruitment, it's then about how you're changing that process. And again, from the survey we did, we know that 67% of you are already looking at strengths-based indicators, and 60% of you are using blind CV recruitment. So there's lots of great changes. And from a data perspective, actually 47% of you are actually starting to ask about an individual's lower socioeconomic background at that recruitment stage. So having that data piece really helps you drive to understand what's coming through that talent pipeline and then succeeding as you go through. Interestingly, though, the support of individuals through that process wasn't so great. So there's 13% of you from those that responded to the survey are supporting people through that recruitment process. So by that, it might be helping them understand what that process might mean or coaching them through it so they understand how they can get through this assessment process. The other thing which I think for us, given what's happened in the news recently with the A-level results, there needs to be almost a COVID-19 lens over your recruitment process. So where maybe some of you do contextualised recruitment, there almost needs to be this COVID-19 contextualisation as well, because it's not just going to affect people this year, it's going to affect a generation of people who've had their education and opportunities impacted by COVID-19. And the other thing is obviously then when you've done the recruitment, it's then the key thing about this onboarding process. So it's not just about when you've got that offer to the individuals, it's about then supporting those individuals, maybe with linking them into charities that can offer them work appropriate, clothing, etc. And if they need to start the job quicker than most, again, seeing if you can actually enable individuals to start soon. So the recruitment process isn't just about going out and doing contextualised recruitment. It's about each of these steps and how you're going to do this. And a perfect example of how this is done is with Accenture. So I just wanted to share a case study of somebody that they obviously talked to us about. So Lindsay, if you just wanted to go on to the next one. So with Accenture, they have revitalised their recruitment process. And obviously I'll let Joan and Helen and Tom talk that more in detail. But Tolu is an individual who's benefited from that change. And actually she felt that it was an application process so different than anything she's applied to before. But actually because of that support and looking at her potential, she obviously then was successful with an opportunity with Accenture. So now I shall not talk anymore and I shall hand over to the Accenture team. So Lindsay, if you could just flip onto their slides, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Nina, and thank you also to the Social Mobility Commission for having us to be a part of this. We really appreciate it. And like many people, we're quite passionate about diversity, about social mobility. I'm also very passionate about recruiting, and so it's great to get a chance to share that with you. So first of all, myself, as an introduction, I have worked with Accenture for nearly 10 years now, which is crazy. I'm not quite sure where the time's gone. My name is Joan Moore and I head up early talent recruiting for the UK with a sort of dotted line to Ireland as well. That encompasses graduate, internship and also apprenticeship hiring. We also have Tom Price-Daniel, and in the interest of time I'll introduce you, Tom. Hope you don't mind. But Tom is the Chief Revenue Officer at Head Start. And we also have Helen, who works in the early talent function in the UK at Accenture. And she's been at Accenture even longer than me, like 12 years, and she heads up on our assessments and candidate experience programs. So on to the next slide. You can skip that. There we go. Okay, so in terms of Accenture, it obviously goes without saying, as a large organisation and one that is very passionate about I&D, that we do focus on all of these areas across our recruitment process. We work closely with corporate citizenship internally to do a number of different outreach programmes, but we also want to make sure that for any candidate that applies to a role at Accenture, whether it's an apprenticeship programme, a graduate programme or otherwise, that they feel kind of two key things. So first of all, we want them to really get a sense of what I&D means to us, that it is very much a part of our wider business focus. And indeed, it's that has put us as the #1 on the Refinitiv Inclusion Diversity Index for 2 years running, which we're really pleased about. But also that when they apply to us, that they feel they've been able to understand themselves a little bit better, that they've understood their own kind of strengths, and that they feel they've been able to kind of demonstrate their full potential through the assessment process. Now today, because we haven't got much time, I am going to focus on just 2 key areas. So first of all, a bit of a summary around how we approach our attraction strategy, and secondly, a bit about how we've undergone that transformation on assessments that Nina alluded to earlier. So on to the next slide. So this slide is my attempt at encapsulating some of the key elements that I think are really essential ingredients if you want to perform your best in terms of recruiting the most diverse entry-level talent. Now, it goes without saying there's no silver bullets, unfortunately, so sorry if any of you were hoping to join this call and find that we give you that. However, I do think, you know, you need to have a number of different things that you take really seriously and bring into consideration across your whole strategy. And much of this slide is probably pretty self-explanatory in showing those kind of key elements, but a few things I wanted to pull out. So first of all, nothing has happened overnight at Accenture. It is, as I said, very much the case that I&D is central to our global and local growth strategies. We have publicly declared targets on gender and ethnicity. In the UK, our ethnicity focus is particularly around African Caribbean hiring. And you may have seen we've done things over a number of different years. We did a brilliant Inclusion Starts With I video, which I believe is still on YouTube, which is an emotional but really lovely watch, about 4 years ago. But we've kind of worked hard, particularly my team, over the last 10 years to really show that kind of upward curve in how we're performing across diversity. And that's been something we've achieved with both quick win, smaller changes, some of which are lower cost or no cost, and then other bigger scale, larger scale innovations that have actually supported that change. There are, I think, a few things that are really central to driving that as follows. So number one, I think you absolutely need to enlist a kind of army of passionate, engaged supporters internally. So finding who those people might be, and they may not always be the people you think are the most obvious. And sometimes those supporters can be as useful, across levels. So it doesn't have to be managing directors who bang the drum the loudest. And I think that's another really important point. Number two, I think for us a really key thing has been moving away from anecdote. We had a few years where we were definitely killed by anecdote, and really using data to kind of make decisions and to help influence that change. And I think with the data point, it's worth noting that I think it's important to use your own data, so having a sense of your own analytics, but also using external data as well. Then also facing into the awkward questions, as we call them, so breaking down the barriers and applying that kind of growth mindset to every stage. And I'll give you some examples of those challenges we've had to face in the next slide. 2 other kind of key themes I'll pick out. So first of all, there is no point thinking about social mobility and applying it only to the school space or the apprenticeship space. And I often speak to employers who are doing that. So they're doing some great stuff in terms of earlier engagement across the schools market, but they're really not where they perhaps should be or in terms of the thinking space in their graduate hiring. So it's important to apply it across. And also the importance of intersectionality. So for us, we have focus areas around gender, ethnicity, LGBTQ+, mental health, candidates with disabilities, which we refer to as enablement in our internal networks, and social mobility. In fact, next year, a key focus of our campaign is going to be drawing even more heavily around the theme of mental health, as that has really natural synergies for us with much of the kind of business research we're doing, and we know that that also really resonates with the student market. Okay, so if you move to the next slide, hopefully the next slide kind of illustrates just some of the barriers we have had to break down at ACCENTURE. So we had a UCAS point requirement for our consulting programme, which is called the Analyst Consulting Group. For that programme, we recruit between 300 and 350 people a year in a typical year. So that for us is a big feeder into our early talent pool. And we did have a UCAS point requirement for that entrance. We also had a tech, for our tech programmes, we had a requirement for candidates to come from a particular STEM degree. So we worked really hard to build clear business cases internally in order to get UKI executive or board level sign off to do away with those barriers. But again, it didn't happen overnight, unfortunately. So Helen, I have to say, was heavily involved in this. I think I was out on a mat leave at the time, actually, so I probably wasn't as helpful to her in that year. But we did really have to think about how we were going to manage the potential of higher volumes of applications as a result of removing those barriers. And we also had some stakeholders who did have a concern about how removing them might impact the quality of the hires that we brought in. So we had to really demonstrate how removing those barriers would ensure the opposite, that we were absolutely accessing better, the best, most diverse talent in the market as a result of taking those actions. And actually transforming the way we assessed candidates was absolutely central to that. And that's where Tom and Helen will shed some light on that in a moment. And then secondly, in the time I've been with Accenture, we've absolutely transformed where we go to hire students and those particular sourcing channels we use. So we've gone from a kind of list of purely Russell Group universities that we had when I first joined to a list which is, now made up of perhaps 60% Russell Group. Actually, in all honesty, my target is to do away with the notion of a target university list entirely. I actually think as we move in this new digital virtual world more towards those kind of sourcing models, attraction events, that gives us a huge opportunity to go everywhere, have a presence that is accessible to all and not actually need target universities. The final point here is to, again, emphasise the point about the data piece. So I think it's really important, or it was certainly really important for us, to have a sense of where we had come from and how we had done in previous years, to get a view of how we were doing at that time that we made those changes, and then to crucially set a really clear vision of where we wanted to get to, even if it felt like it was really unreachable at that point. But actually it's amazing then to look over the last few years to see what we have achieved and to kind of track the success we've made there. At the time, we were using a Taleo-based reporting system, which really wasn't able to give us the kind of granular detail that we needed with reporting. By moving to Head Start as our application tool, that has totally changed the game for us. We now have the detail at our fingertips that we need, and crucially, by using the data and adding to that the storytelling element, which is so important, to use a buzzword, that is what has really helped us to engage stakeholders, but also to influence the wider market too. So on to the next slide. So diversity has always been a really key theme for us across our candidate sourcing and attraction strategy. But it is fair to say over the last few years, we've kind of almost put diversity right at the heart of our campaign that we run every year. Each year we run a recruitment campaign with a slightly different theme. This last campaign, so last year's campaign, was around the theme of powerful minds. So the concept was based on encouraging students to think about identifying and learning about their own unique strengths. So we created a quiz which could be done either online, so it was accessible, or via huge screens. So you can see in that picture at the top there that we took out to schools and university campuses. And students answered a series of questions which helped them uncover what was their dominant mindset or strength. We then use that as an opportunity to tell them who in our business has a strength like them and bring to life the kind of career route that that person had gone down within Accenture. And in doing so, we really wanted to consciously kind of bust all the myths. So, that perhaps if you you were analytical, you wouldn't have to go into a technical role in the tech part of our business, that actually there were people across consulting and other areas of our business with that skill as well. And we also emphasise the point, which I think is particularly prevalent around social mobility, that your strengths aren't just enhanced through work experience or being able to do certain internships, but also you may have a natural strength in that area, or indeed you may be able to kind of gain more strengths or develop that through life experiences or hobbies and interests, which I think is really important. So that was the general theme of the campaign. I obviously don't have time today, as much as I'd love to tell you all the detail behind all the different components of that campaign, but just a couple more snippets to share that I think are important. So we create a lot of kind of support, and just to Nina's point at the start, I think support of candidates, giving them the answers to questions they may have, guiding them through that process, letting them know about what they should expect, has been really key for us in terms of our strategy, both across assessments and attraction. One of the ways we did that was we created a podcast in which we explored the theme of technology and diversity. We are a tech consulting company. It's really important to us, whatever role candidates sign up for, that they have an understanding of what that means for us as a business and why tech is important. So what we did was we took those themes of tech and diversity, and we talked in the podcast about the intersection of that and how that plays out in terms of the work we do for our clients. In one particular episode, we talked, for example, about tech for good. So we talked about the way we'd use the Alexa app, and we'd created tools to help tackle loneliness amongst the elderly. We also held two fantastic events called Powerful Minds Presents, which were attended by hundreds of students in Newcastle and London. And those explored, again, the kind of themes of tech and diversity. At those events, we had a Q&A panel. We had an external speaker who was a spoken word poet, so something totally different, not something you would expect at a recruiting event. And they did a magnificent job bringing to life some of the diversity themes that were important to them, as Black Lives Matter. And we also talked about the technology we used. And I think, again, particularly important with a lower social mobility audience, you want to make sure that you've got some tech in the room, that they can actually have a chance to kind of see the tech, play with the tech, ask questions about it. And you know, that was a definite draw as well for students who had maybe never had a chance to see VR or, you know, those kind of the Google Glass sort of type tech before. So for us, that was a brilliant event, and we had really great feedback from students about it. And for us, one of the key things that stood out as well was being able to kind of have that human conversation alongside the tech. So for us, it goes without saying, we make sure that we've got representatives from across our business representing different parts of the business, but also diverse demographics. Make sure that, you know, we are ourselves being diverse and giving students the opportunity to meet people like them from different backgrounds and with different career routes. And what we found was that actually, for us, there's the element of, you know, having those right people in the room, but also us empowering our business representatives to speak openly and honestly about what a career at Accenture looks like. And that's also really important. So we said to them, you know, tell them the things you don't like about the job. Tell them about your worst day, not just your best day. And that also really helps students to assess whether we were right for them. Because after all, this is, I think often it's easy to forget it, it is very much a two-way process. And, you know, for us, it's actually okay for a student to leave one of our events and say, do you know what, I love the event, it sounds like a great company, but it isn't for me. And that's okay too. So that kind of human conversation alongside the tech, you know, we are not just robots, is really important. So moving on then to the next slide, I guess, and for us kind of thinking forward, oh sorry, move back, sorry. I forgot my bullet points again, sorry. So moving forward then, and thinking to next year, like many employers, we're in a bit of a state of flux in terms of not knowing quite how the current pandemic situation will affect our hiring numbers for next year, our budgets, all of that kind of stuff. But there are a few knowns that we're going with. So first of all, that everything is moving to virtual, certainly for this coming autumn season. And I actually think that's a huge positive for employers like us, making sure that we're really accessible to all. I think the key is for us to make sure we're still doing some larger scale events through different kind of platforms, tech platforms, but also smaller scale events that give students who maybe aren't so confident in those larger environments the opportunity to still get that support, ask those specific questions. So things like insight days or case study style events, there are some great ways we can still use tech to still add that value and do those sorts of events. It doesn't have to be all big impact events. Secondly, it goes without saying we don't do all of this alone. So we do a lot of different activities across Accenture, but we also work with some amazing third parties across a number of different diversity themes, but specifically with social mobility in mind. We also sponsor different clubs and societies on campus, but with everything we do in that space, everything has a diversity focus, and everybody in my team totally understands that. So we need to be clear about the return on investment that we're getting from all of those different kind of third-party relationships and partnerships that we're creating. And then finally, the point again around intersectionality. So as I said, that's going to continue to be a key theme for us. We found that intersectionality really works for us in terms of being able to explore a number of different things that are important to us at Accenture on the I&D themes. But then finally, I guess all of the sourcing and attraction stuff is great, and it's great to have the whiz-bang things and the smaller things, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't have a really strong assessment process that really kind of supports that and supports candidates to perform at their best. So over now to Helen and Tom, who can tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Joan. Just as a reminder, my name is Helen Oregon. I work with Joan in the early talent team, and I'm the candidate experience and assessments lead. So that means essentially I look after anything from point of application right through to the candidate's first day with us, including all the assessments. So today I just wanted to talk you through our assessment transformation. It's going to have to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully I will hit on some of the really relevant points. So back in 2018, we totally transformed our end-to-end assessment process. It's a process that had been in place probably for as long as I'd been at Accenture, from about 2008 onwards. And it's probably really important to mention that actually nothing was broken. We were delivering a really high volume of candidates into the business. We were getting really good feedback from our stakeholders. We were getting really good feedback from candidates. So essentially nothing was broken in that process. And there were, as you can see from the slide, a number of motivators for change. But I'd say one of our really key drivers was diversity. So although we were doing fairly well in terms of gender and ethnicity, we definitely knew we could be doing more, especially in that social mobility space. And what we wanted to do is start eliminating bias by design, and build a process around that. So next slide, please. So one of the first steps was to build a strengths framework, and I know a number of you are already using strengths-based interviewing. So here you can see the sort of the key areas that we're looking at. But it was really important that our new process, especially at entry level, was focusing on potential and not past performance. We felt very strongly that, you know, if we were using competency-based interviewing styles, that we were only ever looking at examples, a tell me when example. And actually those kind of questions only really favour those that are fortunate enough to have the opportunities. So we knew there was a whole pool of talent out there that we would be missing out on by just looking at past performance and not looking at kind of future potential. Next slide, please. So we wanted to build a really equitable process, and one of the first steps in doing that was working with Head Start. And so, you know, that key driver of making a level playing field was really important. So we wanted all candidates, regardless of background, to have a really fair shot at demonstrating their potential. And we started working with Head Start, and in a second, Tom will give you a little bit more detail of kind of how Head Start works sort of in the background. But for us, Head Start provided us with three key things. So it's our candidates apply through Head Start, and it's a mobile enabled application process. Head Start gives us a wealth of things, but the three key things I want to focus are the contextual recruitment. So using a candidate's data and allowing us to evaluate a candidate's academic achievements in the context of which they achieved them, which is really important. So Tom will be able to go into more detail about this, but sort of from my perspective, a very crude example is if we have a candidate applying with sort of lower academic achievements, but they were in a school in special measures, from a single parent family on free school meals, the fact that they might have got 3 C's really tells us something about that candidate. They've achieved against the odds compared to somebody that might have been at private school in very small class sizes, who's achieved 3 A's when everyone else in the class is achieving 3 A's. So it was really important for us to be able to see candidates' achievements in the context of which they achieved them. And as Joan touched on earlier, the data was also really important for us as well. So using Head Start, we suddenly have access to a wealth of data that we never had before, especially around social mobility and ethnicity, and a whole pool of sort of diversity data. And it really opened our eyes to the demographic, who is applying to us and what is happening to those candidates in the assessment journey. So we're able to look back on kind of, you know, the last season and see what happens to candidates in our assessment journey. But the other really important area is that we can look at candidates' data in real time. So we can identify those candidates who might be becoming disengaged, or who might need additional support along the way, or just a bit of encouragement, or, you know, might have stopped halfway through our process and it's because they've got a question that they need answering. And it allows us to re-engage with particular groups. And finally, Head Start has provided us a really fair screening process. So we were becoming more and more aware that our old process had many human handoffs and a lot of human decision making, and that's obviously where the bias really begins to creep in. And as I mentioned, we really wanted to eliminate bias by design, and so Head Start has provided us a really fair screening process by removing that bias. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, you can move on again one.
So, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Not my first time on Zoom, but almost on mute. So yeah, I just wanted to go into a little bit of detail and just take a couple of minutes to talk about the Head Start system to give a bit of context to how we work. So I think, you know, we're probably preaching to the converted here if you're on this call, but getting a job is rigged. It's unfair if you're on free school meals and you're 16 and you're a white male, your grade attainment is 33% lower. That doesn't make you 33% less qualified to do the job. So what we're doing in our system is we're taking a variety of inputs, things like postcode at the age of 14, free school meals and parental education. And that's giving us kind of multiple indices of deprivation measurements that we measure individually and then collectively put together. We then measure that alongside access to things like skills, education, but interestingly, we don't evaluate one educational institution above another. And that provides us ultimately with a score. And that score in this case would be Denise scoring 77.59. But what's interesting about that score, and I know somebody mentioned there are other tools that look at contextual information, is what we're doing there is we're integrating the deprivation index into that outcome. So the score is a representation of somebody's ability in the context of their environment. So as Helen said, if somebody has got 3 C's, went to the worst performing school, was on free school meals, parents didn't go to university and generally had a bit of a tough time, but has ultimately gone on to outperform their environment, they can score approximately up to 8%, on average 6% of an increase. So we're not looking to lower the scores of people that have had opportunity, but what we're trying to do is identify people that would have previously been excluded, level the playing field, and find candidates that are you know, enormously able, but perhaps would have been marginalized had it not been for this system or other systems. Back to you. I hope I win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, my 1 minute.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm conscious of time, so obviously need to move on to our breakouts, but I'm just going to go through the rest of our assessment process. So candidates apply through Head Start, and they are automatically moved on to our discovery portal. So we have a fair amount of automation in our process now, but it's really important to mention here that actually, although we have automated much of our process, and actually candidates are very much the driver of their own destiny within these assessments. They do everything in their own time and at a time of their choosing, but we have very much an open door approach. So we have a lot of, we have digital chat platforms to engage candidates, so that we can be really transparent about our assessment process. They're able to ask any questions about our process. We don't keep anything hidden. Our aim is to be very sort of supportive and very approachable. So the Accenture Discovery Portal, as you can see here, it is online assessments, and it's probably equally educational as it is an assessment tool. So everything a candidate needs to know about the assessments is within the tool. So no previous experience is of any benefit here. So regardless of whether you've had work experience or you haven't had work experience, everything you need to know is in that tool. And behind every tile is some information or some questions or an exercise. And we're very much trying to educate candidates on what life is like at Accenture, the culture, as well as the kind of work we do. But the aim is to make it a really level playing field. So regardless if you're someone fortunate enough to have a whole load of internships under your belt, or somebody who hasn't had any work experience, that isn't relevant, because the information to answer the questions is sitting right here in the portal. Next slide, please. So candidates then progress from our discovery portal into our assessment centres here. So here we're sharing an image of virtual reality. We use a number of virtual reality challenges within our assessment centres. And virtual reality really enables us, again, to create that level playing field. So candidates will do a number of exercises totally immersed in that virtual environment. But again, no experience will help you in that virtual environment. So no experience or sort of career coaching is helpful here. You're sort of immersed in the challenge, and it enables us to see what candidates will do in a particular situation. So it's really enabling us to see sort of strengths and potential. Important to mention that although we use virtual reality, that is one small element of a much wider group of assessment pieces within the assessment centre. So we do strengths-based interviewing, again, really looking at the future, we're looking at potential, we're not looking at pedigree. We do a lot of situational-based questions, so putting candidates in a situation, you know, for example, with a client, and asking them, you know, how they would react and what they would do next. So really about looking to the future. We won't be doing obviously virtual reality this year. We are very much looking at our virtual options. So we had to have a quick turnaround in March and move our assessment centres virtually, but actually what we're working on at the moment is creating an assessment centre built for a virtual environment. But again, it will be following all the same principles as we do now. So very much looking at situational based, strengths based assessments, and looking at that. Next slide, please. So I'd say there's some lessons learned along the way. And as Jane mentioned earlier, really important to understand the context of the area that you're working in. And so much of that is down to the data. And then obviously once you have that data, you can start really understanding the demographics of your applicants. And we have something in the region of 35,000 applicants. So there's certainly a really rich data source there, and we can really start telling our own stories. And instead of using the sort of anecdotal stories about particular demographics and how they behave in an assessment journey, actually we can now tell our own story, and then we can tweak our own assessments or tweak the support that we give to make sure that we are kind of supportive and appealing to everybody that's applying. So walking in their shoes through that recruitment process, so we think very carefully about everybody that might be applying, whether we're accessible, both in terms of being able to do the assessments, but also whether we're accessible in terms of support and answering any questions that candidates might have. When we undertook the assessment transformation, obviously it was a significant piece of work, but what we had realised is, with the best will in the world, we were doing so much towards diversity, but we weren't really moving the dial. But what is beginning to change for us is working with Head Start, for example, and changing that assessment process. So I'd say my biggest tip would be make one significant change rather than many smaller incremental changes, because they're so resource heavy, it makes such a lot of work, but you may only sort of shift the dial marginally. Finally, obviously working with third parties who know the market and provide market data, but also kind of all the analytics and the data that you need in order to understand your own demographic. Next slide, please. So this sort of sums up everything that we have covered. So I won't drain the slide in the interest of time, but one thing I did want to mention as well that we haven't got time to get onto today is that onboarding piece. So we still look very much at that onboarding piece from point of offer to first day as still a big engagement piece. We don't feel it's still an area of kind of, we should be in a position where we're still sort of selling to candidates, we're still courting candidates, but also really importantly, we're still making a level playing field for candidates so that everybody feels job ready and confident on day one. So at the moment we're working hard on a kind of very enhanced pre-joiner engagement strategy, which includes lots of soft skills training. We're working with some third-party vendors around that, and some tech training as well, so that everybody on day one feels as confident as the next person, regardless of background or experience. That's it from me.
Great, thank you, Helen, and thank you, Tom and Joan, for a very rich and insightful presentation on your journey really through the whole recruitment process.